So what Dr. Dalavai does is he knows how to humble people on a tennis court. And I'm one of those, I'm one of the victims. So,
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for coming here and spending your valuable time listening to us. Before I got my PhD or my doctorate just a couple months ago, I thought that, you know, the only thing that I could have possibly received my doctorate in was failure, because I have failed a lot in life, and it's because I am not afraid of trying new things, you know. And there's a great quote by a famous athlete, Wayne Gretzky, maybe before your generation. He's very popular growing up. You probably have heard of him. Played this sport called hockey. Not as popular here in the U.S., but in Canada it is, where he hails from. And he said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And it's very obvious, but if you think about it, we are oftentimes crippled by our own fear and anxiety and apprehensions and what other people tell us that we can and can't do. And I'm going to be very authentic and real and transparent with you in my talk today. And I hope that you all will be the same way in some of the responses that I ask of you. And the reason I say that is because some of you may be here for various reasons. When I was growing up in India before moving to the wonderful state of Kansas, long story there that I'll hopefully get to share another time, but my adopted grandfather was actually from the Ukraine, from Russia. He escaped the Bolshevik Revolution way back in the 1910s, and he befriended a young immigrant woman who moved from India to Kansas, and she came to work as a nurse. That immigrant woman happened to be my mom. And in her, my adopted grandfather, the late Dr. Henry Rempel, he instilled in her a lot of these values of authenticity, transparency, trust, and really what I believe to be servant leadership, because in many respects, he was the same way. So my talk today is going to be really very much heartfelt, but also what I've learned from some of my failures in life, quite frankly. And when I was a person in the management track, when I worked for some very large companies, where I did not exhibit either a high degree of EQ or even SQ. And it's a story about a man who was rather arrogant, you know, quite frankly, and thought he knew a lot. And, you know, God has a way of humbling us in life. And one of the things that I had as a dream growing up, and I'll make this very brief and then I'll launch into my talk here, is I love French. How many of you speak French? Anybody? A little bit? Un petit peu? Okay. On peut parler français? Comment tu t'appelles?
Je m'appelle Rui.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Merci. So I had this kind of like ongoing love affair with French, and it was probably because in middle school and high schools, all the pretty girls took French, right? And no, really, it wasn't the case. Maybe part. I did say I was going to be authentic and transparent. But I had this great professor, Madame Subet-Stoll, who was the most outstanding teacher I've ever had in life. She also happened to be a believer, a Christian. And I could just hear when she used to talk about France and visiting France and visiting Paris, it just instilled in me like this really deep, passionate interest to go. And of course, when growing up, we weren't very well off, and so never had the opportunity to go overseas and study. It wasn't until I got into high school that I won a competition and got a scholarship to study at a private language institute called Étoile in Paris. And so I went my junior year, and I loved it. First day, I get to class, and these top language students from literally all over Europe, all over Asia are at this private language institute, and our professor's name is Dominique. And I remember sitting down, she got up and she wrote on the chalkboard 3 French words. And it said, la raison d'être. La raison d'être. Which means, in French, your reason to be. So the question that I want to ask you all today is, why are you here? That's essentially what she asked us to do. Before we progressed and matriculated through this very difficult set of courses for the next 6 months, she said, I need for you all to answer, why are you here? So you all need to answer that same question of why you're here. Okay? Why are you sitting in that seat? Why are you here today? Why are you pursuing the program that you are? Because you all are on a tough track. Okay? It is a tough journey. Okay? I did not complete the medical school journey, but I completed another alternate doctoral journey while working, oftentimes 60, 65 hours a week. So I know how tough it is, right? And I wanted to give up. There's a lot of burnout, regardless of what type of doctoral program you're pursuing. MD, PhD, DBA, whatever it might be, okay? But if you don't start with that question, why am I here? Because God put each and every one of us here on the earth for a purpose, okay? And we've got to answer for ourselves what that purpose is. And part of your journey is answering this call to serve others. And I hope you all view it as servant leadership, because it is a service to others. If you're in it for other reasons, I would respectfully ask you to recalibrate and identify why you're in this journey, because it is a journey. And guess what? You're going to get knocked down. How many of you already been knocked down in this journey? Okay, yeah, hopefully everybody's, right? And we know that by experience, when we get knocked down, makes me think of that song I want to sing, right? Right, you all know what I'm talking about. Get knocked down, get up again. They're going to get me down. Okay, sorry. I like to sing. I sang all my life, right? Not necessarily well, but I like to sing. So, but you build this thing called resilience, okay? And emotional resilience is part of your EQ. And in studying this concept called EQ, more at a management level, what we call a practitioner level, and then now over the course of the last 3.5, 4 years, studying it at a practitioner level or a scholarly level, I now have started to understand a little bit more about the subtleties and nuances of how all of these intelligences work. I don't have it all figured out, but I know a little bit more today, and I do just mean a little bit more because there's tons of research and tons of literature written on these topics that we're talking about, right? But my hope is that you walk out that door today a little bit more intrigued by your own emotional intelligence and your own spiritual intelligence and how that can make you better servants to the society at large, but also servants under the shield of faith that we call Christianity. And let me also say that I'm very, very proud. I don't know each and every one of you. Some of you have gotten to know a little bit better over the course of the last few months. However, I'm very proud of each and every one of you for wanting to explore your faith more and unpack what your faith looks like. My faith is so much deeper and richer and more transparent than when I was your age. And a lot of that has to do because of the school of hard knocks. Getting knocked down, getting up again, being willing to say, you know what, God, I don't know what you had in mind when you decided to knock me down on my face and humble me, but I'm going to make it to my life's mission to figure out what that is, right? And it'll happen to you, trust me. It may have already happened to some of you, right? You've got to work through that. That's why Paul says in his epistle, in several of his epistles, but one in particular where he says, work out your salvation with what?
Fear and trembling.
Fear and trembling, right? That's pretty ominous. When the great Paul says, hey, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. But I will tell you, as you work out your salvation with fear and trembling, I hope that 2 of the arrows in your quiver will be emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. Okay? So, I gave you 2 answers. There's 4 types of intelligences. Okay? I gave you 2 of them already, right? SQ and EQ. What do you think the other 2 are? We'll see how much you listened to the last time I saw some of you and spoke.
Repeat the question.
What's that?
Repeat the question.
This is not the spelling bee, okay? No. There are 4 types of intelligences scholars generally acknowledge, okay? I gave you 2 of them already, which are? Young lady who made eye contact with me, I'm going to call her. Yes! Thank you. I give you a high five if I can reach over there. Okay, the other two, thank you by proxy. The other two are, one of them should be obvious. IQ, right? And it's still, by the way, according to the literature, it's still the most effective predictor of leadership effectiveness in management circles and in organizations today. Okay? Now, I don't want you all to stop there and say, I am really, really smart. I have a high IQ. I've gotten good grades. You know, I graduated at the top 1% of my class or whatever it is that allowed you to be sitting in this chair and pursuing the degrees that you are. I want you to continue to add, like it says in Peter, you know, add to your faith these things, right? I want you to add to that IQ. I want you to add PQ, right? What does PQ stand for? Your body is the temple of God, right? So, what do you think that represents? Physical, yes. Because a large part of you warding off things like compassion fatigue, warding off things like burnout, dissatisfaction, and other aspects that contribute to exiting this journey, okay, detouring off the main road, is how well you exhibit and flex these things called emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence, okay? So, I gave you a handout, and, you know, being kind of a learning professional, I'm just going to pause here. I've had to use my voice a lot here lately. He's yelling at my wife and nieces, and no, I'm just kidding. Being a learning professional, I found that people learn and apprehend information in different ways, okay? So you have auditory learners, right? Those of you who have just really like the deep, sonorous voice that, no, I'm kidding, that are listening to what I have to say, okay? Because you are auditory learners, okay? Others of you are visual. You don't like the tie that I have on. You don't like this jacket that my wife bought me as an early graduation present. Or whatever it might be. So you're looking intently, or you don't want me to call on you. Because if you make eye contact with me, or you don't make eye contact with me, you immediately look down, I'm going to call on you. Like this young lady. So you are visual learners, right? You like to look at pictures. So I tried to accommodate everyone here, okay? The third type of learner is what we call a kinesthetic learner. What do you think that means? Yeah, movement, by doing, right? You apprehend information and you learn by patterns. The brain picks up on it, right? So you learn by doing. And you should actually incorporate all three of those, right? The expert learner is one who is able to take all three of those, okay? Now apply that to your journey. You all have practicum, right? You all have assignments that you have to do. You have to take tests and things of this nature, right? So answer, how do these four intelligences, how do they help me make it through this journey? Okay? So, starting with the first one, when we talked about PQ, physical intelligence, you've got to get sleep. There's been study after study after study, and by the way, I've read a lot of these studies that have to do with physician burnout, right? A large part of my research that I did, you know, the hospital at Parkland was kind enough to let me do research on subjects, managers and healthcare professionals. And I have one of my friends and colleagues who I hope over the course of the next several months you get an opportunity to know, Dr. Joe Chang, because he's in the department where I work presently, and a great friend and colleague. And we talk about these things. We talk about how we can help the leaders with whom we work, how they can be more emotionally intelligent. How can they do a better job of managing people? How can they do a better job of managing relationships? Because for a lot of you, you will move into roles like Joe, right? You will be physicians, you might be surgeons, whatever it is, but then you might move into a physician leader role as well, right? And the Bible has a lot to say about leadership. And I'm convinced, after studying the Bible now 40 plus years and studying EQ and SQ over the course of the last decade, there's a lot of overlap. I mean, not a lot, there's an immense amount of overlap, okay? You look at how Paul admonishes his followers to behave and to interact and to live out life, right? It's all about EQ and SQ. He may not call it emotional intelligence, or he may not call it what the preferred term for me, emotional self-efficacy or spiritual efficacy. But in his epistles, it's unmistakable, right? It's about how we love God, our spiritual relationship, and how that manifests itself in how we treat other people, which is the EQ component, right? But if we don't take care of ourselves, this is the reason why I took a flight here recently, and the flight attendant got on the horn, and y'all have taken flights here, right? And she says, in case of loss of cabin pressure, make sure you go run up and down the aisle, helping everyone else put their oxygen mask on, right? Isn't that what? Why are you laughing? Is that what she said? Or he said? No, right? She said, this person was a she. She said, make sure you put what? Your own oxygen mask on first. So that's what I want to ask you to do. Each and every day in this journey you called life, okay? As a Christian, for those of you who profess to be a Christian, right? And I know in this day and age, it's hard to authenticate what represents a genuine Christian from a counterfeit, right? I will be very authentic and transparent. Earlier on in my life, I lived as a counterfeit Christian. I wanted all the benefits of eternal life and all this stuff that went along with it, but quite frankly, my outward expression of that inward belief system wasn't there. And it took a couple of very, very serious and tragic events in my life involving the death of my mom and the death of my father-in-law to kind of shake me back to reality. My mom passed away in 2004, was a healthcare professional and nurse for 25 years. Every good thing I learned in life was from my mom and my dad, And the way that she treated people, the way she treated her patients, she won all kinds of awards with Baylor. Baylor has this thing called 5-Star Service Award. She won this award multiple times before she passed away. And every time, her physicians, her fellow nurses, her patients said, your mom is the nicest person I've ever met. And then they meet me and they say, what happened to you? I tried to take after it. But the thing that I learned is that, before she got this disease called cancer and she passed away, I was a very non-emotional, non-spiritually intelligent person. I was a believer. I confessed Christ, etc., but I didn't necessarily, the outward expression of that is particularly my relationships with others, right, was not there. And it took this event in my life to really kind of jar me back to reality and say, back to the question, it took me back to 1992, when Dominique, my French professor, she put that la raison d'être. What is your reason to be? And I had to answer that question, right? And it wasn't until then that I really determined in my heart and then set on a path professionally that I wanted my life to be service to others. Whether service to others meant other business professionals, whether that meant ministry people, of clergy, whether it meant other physicians. I didn't know at that time, but I said my life was going to be about service to others. And one of the things that my mom and dad really raised me to was that that's really our payment, if you think of it, right, for our time here on earth. It's service to others. If you read the book of Philippians, which is my absolute favorite book in the Bible, right? I've lost some of my mental faculties, and I can't quote it verbatim anymore, but my parents made me memorize that in the old King James. Yikes. All right? But, and you know how difficult that can be, right? I don't even think you all know what the King James Version of the Bible is. So, the reason I bring that up is you all need to answer that as well, right? Number one, why are you here? Why did you get into this profession? It's a very noble profession. But as my friend, my mentor, my tennis partner, Dr. Yam said, there's a high burnout And if we believe the statistics, 50 to 60% will burn and flame out. Have you ever seen a plane that had a bad or awkward landing burn and flame out? So we get this expression, crash and burn. Have you? Okay. The last 4 years before I came to Parkland, I worked with the Boeing company. And I got an opportunity to go and tour our plant up in Seattle, in Everett, where we manufacture a lot of planes. And they would take us through and show us all these steps that they go through to prevent burnout, crash and burn in planes. It is a very meticulous, well thought out, highly intelligent plan. And I started to ask myself, because this was in the midst of my journey, my academic and my professional journey, and I asked myself, gosh, what plan do I have? What highly intelligent, well thought out plan do I have to prevent myself, with my relationship with my wife, my family, people that I love, from burning out? Because guess what? That's collateral damage. It really is. And you've got to be cognizant. And the way to prevent that is to have some level, more than just a modicum of interest in emotional and spiritual intelligence and the physical well-being part too. So as we saw, and they acted out this plan, right? Because sometimes you would actually see tires that were not manufactured properly, and because of the friction and the speed at which those tires hit the pavement and asphalt, when they land, they would just explode, right? And if you don't have the spiritual fervitude and the spiritual fiber and intelligence to fill your vessel with the right things, when you, sometimes metaphorically speaking, hit asphalt that's bumpy, that's cracked, right? And the coefficient of drag friction and all of that doesn't jive with your journey and how you're doing life and the things that you're putting in your body or whatever it is, okay? To help you get from 6 to 5 a.m. the next day, or however many hours you're staying up, right? Then don't be surprised of the end result, okay? And I can't think of a better plan, if you want to look at it that way, right, than to fill yourselves with the Word of God. And I hope I don't embarrass my friend and colleague Joe, but you know, Joe gets to the office very early. And I see him sometimes when I get there early too, and he has this book on his desk. And some of you probably see where I'm going with this. It's a faith and action Bible, right? He's filling himself up daily, or at least think he is daily. So hopefully what comes out of him is a manifestation of what he's putting into himself. Okay? That's the best product that you can put in yourself. It's the best product that you can ingest. Okay? Next to chicken tikka masala. If y'all, I'm being for real. I mean, it's really good. Okay? My mom and dad used to, I mean, they're still great cooks. My dad taught himself to be a chef and gourmet chef. He's really, really good. But I digress. However, we should have a meeting at this really good Indian restaurant. Anybody up for that? Okay, good.
Oh, yeah.
Let's try something new, maybe? Okay. So, I digress. So, think about that. What are you putting in yourself each and every day? I'm not discounting the IQ part, okay? I'm not discounting the time that you spend exercising or on the treadmill or the elliptical or whatever you do to keep yourself in shape, because you should do that, right? Especially if you're not getting much sleep. Because if you do that, hopefully, if we believe the research out there, it will have a positive effect on your immune system, okay? But you should also think about, how am I fine-tuning my emotions? How am I fine-tuning the spiritual part of my life? Because that is as important. It's easy to chuck that aside and say, hey, you know what? I don't even have 5 minutes. Yeah, you do. You have more than 5 minutes. Think about how many times you look at your iPhones and your Androids and all that, right? I have this thing called the Bible app, and it gives me a verse every day, okay? And I have it set for about the time I get up every day, which is around 4:30. Some habits die hard. I was getting up really early, although Joey gets to 4:30. You've already done, like, you've already had 3 eggs and did a workout, and I mean, no, he gets to the office early. Right?
By then it's through.
That's right. He does. Yeah, he gets up early. But 4:30, boom, the alarm pops up, verse comes up. I know what I can read, right? So as you think about these things that you add to your PQ and your IQ, give some time to the EQ, right? How are you taking care of your emotions? There is a theory that I studied, and I'll wrap up here in a couple minutes. By the way, I really haven't talked about my talk at all, but hopefully you're finding this a little bit mildly entertaining. I'll get to this in a moment. But there's a theory called the theory of planned behavior that I had to study and incorporate into my doctoral dissertation. It's written by a gentleman named Ajzen, A-J-Z-E-N. And he came up with this theory of planned behavior because he was trying to come up with a way to explain the psychology of human behavior and what propels individuals to do certain things. And in the business world, we take a lot of our theoretical frameworks from psychology. So I had to study a lot of psychology, not just an undergrad, but even in my doctoral program. I read a ton of sociology and psychology as well. And in this theory of planned behavior, he says that attitudes help determine your behavioral intentions, which shape your behavior, which then form your actions, which then define what your outcomes are in life, what your results are, okay? So I started to think and ask myself, well, that sounds good. It was validated by empirical research, but the question I asked myself was, okay, can emotions shape attitudes? Can our emotions in life help shape attitudes? What do you think?
Yes.
From a non-empirical standpoint, what's your opinion?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too, right? And there have been studies that have shown absolutely. Because if we wake up and we fill our mind with positive emotions, if we fill our mind with Scripture, it makes it a lot harder for me to go on the highway and somebody cuts me off to flip them off. I told you I was going to be very authentic and real and transparent. I have done that before, okay? I want you to know. Sheer transparency. Edit this later. So, what we fill ourselves with, right, is really, really important. So that spiritual component, that's why it says in Philippians 4, Paul says, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is noble, right? Whatsoever is trustworthy. On and on and on. He says, whatsoever is virtuous. If there be any virtue and any praise, what does he say? Think on these things. Meditate on these things. That's why we read Scripture. It's not to chuck it away, but it's so we can meditate on it throughout the course of the day. Sometimes my wife, when I'm complaining about something, presumably, I'll tell Joe to do something, he doesn't do it, and she texts me and says, okay, here's a verse for you, here's a good verse for you. By the way, surround yourself with people like that in life, right? In this journey, I set out to discover the people who are great at emotional intelligence, servant leadership, and I said this at my dissertation events, and Joe and Ron can vouch for this. No finer example of servant leadership and emotional intelligence than my wife. You'll get to meet her next time Dr. Yam hands you over, and I'm hoping that you all can come over to our house sometime this summer. Not for chicken tikka, but for chicken tikka pizza. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, baby. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. Again, I digress. Let me wrap up my talk here today, okay? So you see this diagram in front of you. It is part of the limbic part of the brain. Can I use this? So it has the limbic part of the brain. The limbic part of the brain has the cerebral cortex, also has the hippocampus. It's the part that's responsible for capturing a lot of our emotional experiences in life, right? 20 years from now or later, you're going to have a lot more emotional experiences to latch onto that will help you connect the dots in life. And the beauty of life is, and the tragedy of life as well, is you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking back. That's why this thing that Ron had mentioned at the bottom of this diagram, this faith quotient, is so important. You've got to have faith in your Creator that says, these things that I'm going through, no matter how difficult, how arduous, how inexplicable they are, it has a purpose. Because we know that according to Romans 8:28, what? We know that what? 1 out of 100 things work together for, right? All things work together for good to those who love God and to them who are called according to His purpose. See, y'all are filled with the Word, right? I start out, you finish. We should take this show on the road. Don't quit your day jobs, really. Okay. No, but the point being, if you fill your system, this vessel we call a body, with the Word, right? That'll come back out at the right time. But if you don't, the same thing's going to happen as well. So the EQ component, just to kind of wrap up, there are 5 components, right? The bottom part here is more of the contemporary version. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. The third one here, I put motivation in there. I asked you what your reason to be was, right? You always have to start with why. Why are you here? Why is your faith important to you? Because along the way, there's going to come a time when your faith really comes alive. And some of you may have had that very transparent moment in your life, right? I described a couple for me that sadly, for me, involved the loss of 2 people who are very, very close to me, right? Still, not a day goes by that I don't think about both of them. But when we think about our motivation for being here, don't let it be something vain and empty like, hey, I want a title next to my name, or I want a bunch of money, or whatever. That's noble, but it's not as noble as service to others, right? It is not as noble as service to others, because if you think about our ultimate guide in life, Jesus, He said, I didn't come, right? Or what did He say? What did He say? You all tell me.
Didn't come to be served, to be the servant of all.
That's right. I didn't come to be served, but I came to serve, right? That's the best thing in life. And I got to tell you, as an individual who was chasing after money, who was chasing after titles, who was chasing after positions and all this stuff, I will just be very authentic and transparent to you. I get tremendous joy out of serving others. All right? And I hope that's the same for you. Can I pray for us real quick?
Please.
All right. Lord, just first of all, just thank you for who you are. We are so forgetful that you are our choice creator, our conscience, our guide, our friend, our redeemer, and our savior. So thank you for that. I thank you for each and every one of my friends here in this room. You have given us no more nobler mission in life than to serve others. And we thank you that you gave us that example on the cross. Let us be mindful that it's not just okay to be beings that are wired intellectually, but we do have to be beings who are wired emotionally, to lead from the heart, to be wired spiritually, to connect others to you. And I thank you for all those in the room who have been such great examples for me and continue to be such great examples for me, including these students who seek to know you, to call you not only their friend, but their redeemer as well. I just pray for each and every one of them, whatever situation they might be going through, just give them the peace that surpasses all understanding. And we thank you and honor you in the name of Christ. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much.